All right, everyone. I am here with my friend Steven. He's from C.S. Joseph Facebook group and also a Jungian typology Facebook group of mine. And today we have a special treat. He is going to talk to us about autism and how many times autism will get correlated with MBTI or Jungian depth psychology. And so people will just assume that, oh, you're a certain type because you're autistic, or you're not autistic because you're this type. And hopefully we can go into just some basic things about what autism is, how it affects certain people. But why don't you introduce yourself first, and why don't you tell everybody how you've come to be involved in autism activity and activism.
Um, I I from the time I was very young, I struggled with social interaction and making friends. I mean, anytime there was like a group activity, I would be by myself alone. And even my kindergarten teacher noted that. But the problem was with me when I was growing up and why I didn't get a diagnosis in childhood is, first of all, at the time that I was a kid, nobody really looked at that as a possibility. And as I went through school, and I was actually sent to the school psychologist once, but that's a whole nother story. Um, but basically, I was a victim of, the story of the blind men and the elephant. You all
No.
feel a different part of yeah. Well, there's like blind men, and one feels the trunk and says it's a snake. One feels the tail and says,
Oh,
"Oh,
yeah,
this
yeah,
is
yeah,
a
yeah,
rope."
yeah. The
Yeah.
tail. Okay, yeah.
Well, so that was my problem is people would look at whatever problem I was having at the time as I was growing up and saying, "Oh, well, that's your problem." If I'm feeling depressed, oh, well, the kid has depression problem. If I'm having problems focusing, then I have ADHD.
Yeah.
Um, Nobody put all these things together and decide and thought, oh, well, maybe there's something else here. And that was why I missed getting a diagnosis when I was growing up. And I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my late 30s, after which I was already diagnosed with many things, including bipolar disorder, and given many medications. I had a hospitalization, etc. Um, the way I came about my diagnosis was, um, after I'd gone through 4 or 5 different diagnoses with different psychiatrists. One had put me on a different medication, and I was on my way to the drugstore with a friend of mine, which also, by the way, I can't drive a car. I have problems with depth and speed and distance, and I run into things. So I'd never been able to do that. So he had to take me to the drugstore. And I said, I said, I'm thinking I have some form of schizophrenia because I know everything feels differently to me. Um, I would put on a shirt and it would be unbearably scratchy, and everyone else would say, "I don't know what you find wrong with the shirt or why you don't wear it. It's perfectly fine to me." Um, or noises that were not even noticeable to some people would be horrible to me. As in it was like a high pitched squeal, and everybody else is like, "I don't know what you're hearing." Um, so anyway, we were on the way to the drugstore, and I said that about, I don't know, maybe I have some form of schizophrenia, and my friend said, look up Asperger's syndrome. He was a psych student at the time, and they had just talked about it in class. And he said that's all I'll tell you. Just look that up. And so I did, online, and I cried for 3 days because it described me exactly. I had heard of it before, of course, but the layman version they got in magazines completely misrepresented what it was. Um, so anyway, I was thrilled that I discovered myself what my problem had been the entire time. And my next issue was, is this going to do me any good? I mean, when I go back to talk to my doctor again, is he going to agree with this? And I went in to see my doctor about a month after that, and I brought in things that I had printed off the internet, and I set that down in the chair, and I said, I'm not crazy, I'm autistic. And the doctor said, you're right, that's it. I'm going to take you off all your medications because it's not going to do you any good anyway, because it's a cognitive disorder. And I was fine from that point on. Luckily, and speaking on as to how I became a self-advocate, is my therapist at that time, his sister was on the spectrum. And she had been involved in a lot of things, and he referred me to groups and people I can talk to and all that. And one of my best friends, and I really don't want to get into name dropping a whole lot here because I don't know who wants me to talk about them and who doesn't. But they knew who I'm talking about. But if one specific person that I had gotten hooked up with, he got me involved in many projects and speaking to teachers and parent groups and so on. And I've done many paid talks. I've also appeared in a magazine, which I don't have a copy of to show you because my only copy I have is at work in my office. But anyway, so people actually like listening to me. And so I thought, hey, this is cool because one thing I've never had a fear of is public speaking. As long as I'm prepared, I will have everything set out in detail, but I feel like a lot of people feel like they're put on the spot and it's like, oh, everybody's watching me. But for me, I feel more like I'm in control of the people. And you know, this is kind of like my classroom. And so I really enjoy it. And because I did well, people tended to like me. They gave me good reviews. Like after I did a speaking engagement, I just continued to do that. Now, as far as what autism is and what the misconceptions are, I always tell people, it's like when they meet me, people will say, I don't know how you ever got this diagnosis because you don't appear autistic, because they're looking at someone very deep in the spectrum who's unable to live independently, or TV or movie characters, which are usually very unrealistic. So what autism is it's just means that there are three things. There's three traits that, three criteria that you have to meet. Social deficits, which is that you don't understand reciprocity, what gestures mean, have trouble with eye contact, making friends and meeting new people, etc. The other is with communication, which that's the one where I get the most skepticism, because it's like I communicate very well, except if I become emotional. If you were to upset me right now by saying something insulting or whatever, I wouldn't be able to respond to that appropriately. I literally would not be able to speak. And if I did, I would have a very bad stutter. As a matter of fact, usually I'll get that stutter just thinking about it. But I go, which is common for people on the spectrum, I go nonverbal if I get emotional. I will say, and it's not, and it's not rhetoric. I'll say, I can't talk right now, you know, and when I say that, I mean it. I can't communicate to you what I'm thinking. And for people who are deeper on the spectrum, that's the case all the time. That's why people with more severe cases of autism can't speak, is because everything's overwhelming and they can't get words out. For me, like I said, it's just a case of if I become personally overwhelmed, I'm very sad or I'm very angry, I can't speak. And the third part is sensory issues, which is for me with the scratchy shirts or noises being too loud. And sometimes it's the opposite. Like I could be working on something, and this has actually happened, and a bomb can go off next door, and I won't even notice. Somebody, because I had a roommate who rushed in when an actual bomb went off down the street and said, "My God, did you hear that?" And I said, "Hear what?" I don't know what it was. A bomb went off. How did you not hear that? I don't know. I wasn't paying attention. I don't know. But yeah, there's certain clothes I won't wear. I don't like people buying me clothes because things will feel scratchy and itchy to me, and I don't know why. I can't wear like heavy jersey. Light t-shirts are okay. Heavy t-shirts feel like I've been doused in oil, and it gives me the creeps, and that's all I think about the entire time I'm wearing it.
Okay.
So those are the three things that make up autism, and some are more severe than others, meaning some people have very few social problems. They can actually make friends, but they're uncomfortable with it. It's just a mild case of that. But on the other hand, they may have very severe sensory problems and can't go out into sunlight because it blinds them, etc. But all three of those things have to be there. But anyway, yeah, that's basically what I've done is I go around and I do talks, etc. And then lately, just about a year ago, I started getting into Jungian typology.
Okay.
And one of my first actual exposures were when I first got my diagnosis. I was on a site called Wrong Planet, and that's for the autism and Asperger's community, and it's a place where people can get together and talk. I don't really think it's a place where that's cool for the kids lately anymore, but it was at one time. But they did a poll asking people what their MBTI type was, and overwhelmingly it was INTP, INTJ, ENTP, and ISTJ.
Okay. I can see that.
Yeah, and all the others were a distant fifth and down.
Yeah.
So, and it makes a lot of sense if we're talking about TINNE, because those tend to be the functions that you would use as an autistic. Like I am a primary TI user. Everything for me has to, and for those very deep on the spectrum, I mean, they're walking, talking, probably not talking TI, because everything is processed internally. Everything around me externally, I am continuously, and another one of my autism mentors who actually works with children, and she has her entire life, said to me when I was telling her how my brain works, and that's another reason why I do talks. I'm very good. I'm kind of like somebody who's been locked in, and the doors have been open and the floodgates come out. I mean, I can tell you exactly how an autistic mind works. And I was telling her that every single thing I see, and this is why I knew as a child something was wrong with me, is every single thing I look at or feel or experience, I have to use this internal set of checks and balances on what does this mean? Does this make sense? Does this not make sense? And I process it. And it is kind of tiring, and it interferes with so much, like executive functioning. That's another thing we tend to have a problem with, and that's why. For those watching who don't know, because it's technically a psych term, executive functioning is if I ask you, Matthew, you're planning a dinner party for friends and you're serving these dishes, tell me in order what you have to do. If you can do that, you have adequate executive functioning. For me, I can probably tell you, but as far as in practice, I will start doing things that aren't actually a final step. and completely forget about things I needed to do to begin with. And I'm going to like make this dish and I don't have half of the ingredients.
Yeah.
And it really, that's what interferes a lot with your ability to hold down a job. And you have your boss, which I've been in that case, tell you, what are you, an idiot? How come you don't get these basic things? How can you start doing this thing when you didn't realize that you had these, did not have these things first?
Yeah.
And that's what causes it, is because I am so caught up in this one thing and analyzing that, that I don't think about anything else. When I was a child, if you gave me a toy, rather than just playing with it, I would take it all apart and examine the pieces. My mother said my grandfather gave me a toy train engine, and rather than running it around the floor like most little kids do, no, I pulled all the wheels off and spun them like like tops. That was the first thing I did with it. So yeah, that's kind of my background.
Interesting. Okay. I kind of just let you talk that whole time, and so you're nice. Like to confirm your fact that you're informative, and so that's good.
I will go on forever if you don't stop me.
It's like as an ENTP and you're an INTP, there were some things where I can relate to what you're saying, but I think the difference between the two, from what I just gathered, what it is, one affects your day-to-day life, the other one just an inconvenience.
Yeah.
And so with me, I hate wool and some other stuff that's really scratchy, I think, and different things like that, which you would call that SI inferior. But if push came to shove, I can wear a wool shirt.
Mm-hmm.
It's just I don't want to.
Right.
And so, but when you're talking with somebody who actually has the real diagnosis, they just can't.
Right.
They're not going to function regardless.
I've had to leave rooms before because of the sounds or the lights or the colors.
Yeah.
Something important, and I'm like, I can't stay in here, and I won't even say that because of course I'm upset. Remember, I said I go nonverbal, so
Yeah.
I'll just disappear. I'll take off, and nobody will know where I went.
Okay. And this is all making sense. And when you're talking about, I'm going to go way back. I'm an SI user. I remember from the start. So I hope that's okay to go that far back. When you're talking about doctors or your parents, typically speaking, I think a lot of the problem why we have so many issues, and this is still an issue in most countries that aren't as developed as the United States, and most people are aware of autism now. Granted, there's a lot of misconceptions, and I mean, I don't really know much about it. I know it exists. I understand it affects your life, but that's pretty much it. When it comes to people diagnosing people, and this, I mean, doctors are no exception to this rule, is we typically want to diagnose with what we already know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so they're like, oh, you're depressed, so you're this, or you're this, or we found this, so you have to be this. And granted, I'm so happy we have the scientific method, but sometimes even people who are scientists forget to use it, and so then you're like, well, what if it's something else? That never even comes across your mind because you got a job to do, and
Right.
so you see a lot of parents who have this, oh, he doesn't say much, I don't know why, and they're busy with work, they got other kids in the household, and so you just don't have a whole lot of time to deal with this kind of stuff. A lot of what you mentioned, you definitely can correlate to those types themselves. And for all we know, those people aren't even those types. It's just autism causes them to test that way.
Right.
That's
and I was going to get into that.
and so that's a possibility, and which is funny to me because I was thinking about different possibilities when you were telling me this kind of stuff. What was school like?
Horrible for most. Well, for me specifically, I mean, I think 8 out of 10 people on the spectrum are bullied severely in school, and I was. But in elementary school, it wasn't really so much of a problem. But I was also very intelligent. I was the kid in class who, if the teacher asked a question, I would always be raising my hand. I know the answer to all this stuff. Anything you're teaching me in elementary school, And that's because of my TI logic thing. I already knew when I walked in. So there's nothing you're going to teach me. And there's positives and negatives to that. Yeah, it means I got all A's, but I also really wasn't learning anything. And there's a difference. And when you go to school, it's like I'm trying to tell my college students now, don't worry so much about your grades. Worry about, did I learn something? You know, because I don't want to know what you already know. You know, I want to know what it is you're learning.
Yeah.
But that's what elementary school was like. And although, once again, I didn't participate in group things, I didn't talk to people, no one was really going to give me any crap because I was the smartest kid in the classroom. You know, if there were like little quiz games, it's like they all wanted me on their team.
Yeah.
Then when we get into executive functioning, which is a huge problem for us, then we get into middle school. And that all fell apart because it's no longer then a case of I'm just going to walk in and know everything, or you give me a test and I can answer all these questions, but I have to actually complete projects. You know,
Okay.
you're going to tell me, yeah, that, you know, 2 weeks from now, bring in this completed or write this paper, and I don't even know how to begin. There's things now at my age, whatever that is, that I
Over
that
40.
yeah, that I'll tell you that that I avoid doing and I won't do because I just don't know how, and I'm embarrassed to ask anybody, you know, because I should know, you
Yeah.
know. As a matter of fact, that just happened a couple of days ago. I'm really bad at filling out paper forms. I will do stuff online because I can correct and delete things. But if you give me a paper hard copy form to fill out, I will start putting things in the wrong spaces and not pay attention to what I'm doing. And then if that's the only one you gave me, now I have to go back to the office and get another one. And that just happened to me. Um, so, and this happens to me a lot too. I lost my train of thought and I don't know what we were talking about.
You were talking about school, and good, because I want to interrupt you anyways. Uh, Middle school, I'm assuming this is the way it was for you as well, is also in elementary school, you have one classroom,
Right,
one teacher. Then in middle school, you get 6 or
right.
7, depending on your
Which is also
school.
stressful, super
So it's,
stressful.
I was saying, would that be very stressful, and would you lose your place of what class you are going to next?
Right. Yeah, because that's actually another problem. Not only did I have to actually do independent work, or worse, group work, but I had to switch classrooms and teachers all the time. And once again, it's very important for people who are on the spectrum to have consistency. A lot of us will eat the same thing every day, or at least the same thing for breakfast every day. Wear the same type of clothes, the same color. I have a routine that I have a morning routine that I am so comfortable with, and that's it. It's self-comforting. And actually, somebody in the group asked about that question. Is about with coping with things. That's what we do. Are you familiar with stimming? Do you know what that
Yeah,
means?
the
Yeah,
flapping thing.
yeah. I actually do. And people used to think it was just like a nervous tick or whatever, but I mean, I will shake my hand out a lot. And if I do that, if you see me doing this, it means I'm nervous about something, or I'm worried, or I'm stressed out. And if we don't correct that problem, then the stuttering will start, and I'll go nonverbal and have meltdowns and stuff like that. But I have quite a few stims that I do, but that's a form of self-comfort. That's what it is. I'm feeling stressed out, and so this makes me feel better.
It's not because you're
Um,
Italian.
right. Which I am.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
uh, so, but anyway, yeah. So it's very stressful when you need to do things the same way for this for the same class, and now for a different class you're switching different seats, and I'm seeing the room in a different perspective, and that causes sensory problems, and I'm getting instructions from a different teacher who has different expectations. So that also makes it difficult. Suddenly you have different classes. Yeah. And then when I no longer have that, and this is common with other people too, it's not just my story. If you do well in elementary school and now suddenly I'm not doing so well in middle school, I don't have that protection anymore when it comes to social interaction. No longer
Interesting.
am I the smartest person in the room, because now I went from getting A's to getting C's because I can't do any independent work. My self-esteem goes down, and so now instead I'm getting kind of attacked for answering questions because, hey, who are you?
Yeah.
So yeah, and so now that's when the harassment starts, and you get picked on for not having any friends, for stimming, for pacing back and forth or talking to yourself, things I could get away with in elementary school. So yeah, it's school is generally not a good experience.
Interesting. Okay.
Mhm.
If I might relate this to myself, since I am an SI user, middle school was interesting for me was the fact that I agree with you on the form things, and I don't know if this is just a systematic thing, because I think that sometimes you see forms and just seems so inefficient the way they wrote it out, and so I can get off track there. But I love the dynamics of switching classes and having differences and all these different squirrel, because I'm an ENT who like squirrels,
Yeah.
and that part I didn't like all the extra legislative type things where you're just writing and these projects and this flowery stuff that had nothing to do with it. So I started to hate school in middle school as well, but not for the
Mhm.
reasons you did. um, but I get that dynamic where it also seems like middle school was kind of like you just get thrust into adulthood, and everyone matures a different way anyways, regardless of autistic or not.
Right.
And so I remember, although I, I I was gay, but I didn't really accept it at the time. I was getting harassed because I wasn't dating girls for
Right.
obvious reasons, and so
Understandable.
and that was an issue for me because you stood out as something different. So I can kind of relate with being different in that sense, and being a minority, because I was just like, why are you guys dating girls? That doesn't make any sense to me. And it's not that I had a boyfriend or anything, but it's just that it wasn't interesting to me. And this is like a digression, but this is good for people, because I think a lot of people who are parents have kids will watch this, and they can maybe help their kids out a little bit more. So how could you make, for obviously on the ATEC scale is wide ranging on the spectrum, but uh, how could a parent help their child? Let's start with elementary school and then middle school.
Um, what I normally say to that question is, um, make sure communication is very open with your child if you're a parent and you know you have an autistic child who's going to school. Because if if you don't make it clear that if they're having problems with someone, or they're struggling with a class, or that they're not getting something done, or that they're misunderstanding something, and they don't tell you, it's only going to snowball. A problem that I had in elementary school, which once again is in understanding things. Everything's internalized. Anything that comes in from the outside, but it's that would be it's what TE nemesis for me, right?
Yeah.
Anything that comes in from the outside is kind of like lost. I don't get outside information, so you can make something as obvious as hell to me, and I'm not going to see it. 'Cause I also have low SE. I mean, too. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm an SI user, not SE. So those two things get lost. So, and this is why there's so many things that, like I said, I don't know how to do as an adult, which are everyday occurrences for everybody else. Um, and so, like when I was in elementary school, I didn't realize the first time our school's library, I didn't realize that you were supposed to bring the books back. So I would go in and I would take books, and so then the librarian was writing to my mother saying, it's like, he's taking books out and it's like we're not getting them back. So once again, that's something that at some point somebody had taught us, because you have to learn that. But because I don't take in a whole lot of outside information, everything's internal logic, I miss that.
Yeah.
So and that's why I said even now there's things that I avoid doing, because it's like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this, and people are going to laugh at me.
Yeah.
So and so, like I said, to answer that question is it's like the communication has to be open both ways. I mean, parents also have to be open to whatever you need to tell me, you can tell me. But at the same time, I need to be aware that there's questions I have to ask you, because maybe you don't know that you're doing this wrong. So every day you have to ask, what did you do today? What, you know, there's that almost platitude question out. So what did you learn in school today? You know, a
Yeah.
whole bunch of stuff. I was at school. That's what school's for. but
Okay.
but instead, specifically, tell me what kind of a day you had and what it was you did, because that's the only way you're going to really catch if they're doing something wrong that they're not aware that they're doing.
would it help the autistic child if the parent had a set, consistent day? Like, let's say you talk about school every day at 4:30.
Yeah,
Would that
and
help the autistic child?
that's wonderful, because that also sets up a routine. You know,
Interesting, because you mentioned
get them
routines and
to,
things like that, and so I'm just thinking of different ways. I'm sorry, this is how my mind works. Is you give me information, I process of what could possibly happen,
yeah.
and obviously ways to be caring about it, and because I get that, because I can correlate what you're saying to TE critic to SE demon in my own self, and there's like certain things that NTPs just get easily, but then
Mhm.
there's some basic fundamental stuff that other people seem to get, and I have no idea why they get it, and so it's kind of like I'm like halfway there with you, but then there's like another level, if that makes
Right,
any sense.
right.
And a lot of social constructs with no low SE, just like, which makes sense why certain people who are ENTPs, one you left out was INFJ. That seems to be the correlated with Asperger's though, INFJ.
Um, I,
Because Greta Thunberg's an INFJ apparently, and she's
I always thought she was an INTJ. I think that was how
I don't know. I didn't type her. This was Rick, Vic, I think, did that, and a bunch
I
of people
don't think
agree with
so.
him.
I think she's an INTJ.
Okay.
Um, but and yeah, because INFJs they have FE parents. That would be pretty difficult to pull off if you're on the spectrum, because that's our most difficult function. I mean, like I said, my knowledge here isn't great, but I mean, I know what FE is, and
Yeah.
that's interchanging feelings with others, and that's what we don't do. Um,
Well,
so
the problem with NTPs is we don't know how those feelings really feel. And
yeah,
so you can't sympathize with them. So I can understand that you're upset.
right.
Does that mean that I've been that upset? Maybe, maybe not, and so that's where the sympathy correlation is. And that's what, the issue is.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about NTs, which are obviously primary suspect, and you can even add STJs in this concept because they also lack one side of some kind of emotional feeling. And so that's why they get labeled as narcissist, autistic, whatever, things like that. And with INTJs, they're going to be lacking FE, and so they're going to be not able to correlate of how you feel about certain things, but they know how they feel at all times, essentially.
Right, and that's one of the reasons why I've typed her as an INTJ. I mean, she
Okay.
knows her own mind. I don't think she understands, because I've seen this in interviews when people talk to her, that she really fully understands what other people are feeling, and
Yeah.
why what she says might put people off. Because
Interesting.
actually, the NTPs like us, I mean, we have FE, it's FE child and FE
Inferior.
inferior. So I mean, we're users of it, but it's like it's something that doesn't come naturally. It's not right at the top. And that's the problem with me is I'm aware of it, but I struggle with it. But one misconception is that people on the spectrum are, I mean, a lot of people will um, almost think it's synonymous with being psychopathic. And it's actually the opposite, once again, because we do have feelings, but it's almost the opposite because my feelings are actually so strong because, like I said, I get overwhelmed. And that, like I said, that's what happens when I go nonverbal. If I do get emotional, my feelings are so strong, and I feel I can't go in a room, for instance. I don't like going to viewings at a funeral home. You know, where there's like close relatives. You know, they'll say, "Oh, come down and see this person that you worked with or whatever." I can do that, but if they have like close relatives there who are just hysterical and crying,
Yeah, I get the same thing.
it's not that it feels uncomfortable to me, like, you know, I'm Dr. Gregory House and it's like, oh, this is weird. It's because it affects me just as much as those rough clothes or the bright lights. Somebody crying and being emotional around me affects me so badly that I can't be there.
Yeah,
Um, so I mean, we do have feelings, and it's just a matter of I choose to suppress a lot of the, you know, feeling vibes that I'm getting because it's too overwhelming and
yeah.
uncomfortable.
Interesting. Yeah, I get that, and I've talked about this at length in different times about FE users and funerals being almost like a catastrophic time.
Mhm.
And when it comes to NTPs, is you're feeling a bunch of emotions that you've never felt before. It's just being thrust on you, and you're like, ah, and you don't know how to handle it, and so you're just like, well, I got to get the hell out of here. And I get that. Typically speaking, what I do in those situations is, I guess I kind of go into my shadow sense and
Mhm.
kind of just shut down and get real introverted at funerals, where I just have to process it and I my way through, and just like, this will be over soon, so it doesn't really matter. And granted, but I'll only go to them if I have no other choice. With that being the case, and so in elementary school, you mentioned the open communication, have a schedule, and so every day before dinner at 5 o'clock, Junior is
And,
going to tell us about his school day. What did he do? And he can process it or whatever like that. And that way he has time to prepare for it. And that
mhm.
would help too. Do you have any, I don't know, this is going to be I'm derailing already. Do you have any theories on why it's mostly males?
um, I think it's not really. There are some theories on brain chemistry between males and females, but those differences aren't vast in children who have not even gone through puberty yet. And that's where you can already see it. So I think it's a matter of, um, and I think this is probably the prevailing opinion, that girls tend to not have the more obvious traits to get the diagnosis. Um, for instance, it's very hereditary. If you have a parent on the spectrum, you will probably have a child on the spectrum. And my mother was probably on the spectrum.
Interesting.
She could not. She had much the same problems that I did, but when you're a woman, particularly one who um, grew up in the 40s or 50s, you could get a man to take care of you.
Yeah.
Who cares about executive functioning? And she couldn't drive either, and she had a problem with distance and speed. She always thought if she was in a car, she was traveling faster than she was, and it would make her sick. Um, she did not like rubber or latex touching her because it felt really creepy, etc. But if you're a man and you're looking to date a woman, that's cute and it's quirky. It's not a problem. And I think that's why still, even now, girls tend to not get diagnosed as often.
Yeah.
Because for boys, that's weird. For girls, it's cute.
Interesting. Well,
Mhm.
yeah, if NTP is the main type, we're weird anyways,
Hmm.
because SI is not a male trait.
Right.
And I mean, I wasn't trying to imply that girls aren't autistic.
Yeah.
I have a friend who is very, very high nonverbal autistic, and he has a daughter,
Right.
and so, I have seen it in females too. It just seems that, and it seems to be the more common knowledge that it's mostly even boys, but it's
Mhm.
interesting. Okay. And
Well,
so, in middle school, if I might interact, if I was a father and I had an autistic child in
mhm.
middle school, would going to the school early and letting them walk around and get used to it before school start help?
Not it's not going to do anything if they've already been going to the school, but I strongly advise anything new. Um, Remember in our pre-interview conversation here, I told you that this kind of terrified me because it's something I haven't done before. Um, so especially with children, if you're taking them somewhere they haven't been or introducing them to a new activity, take them ahead of time. I still actually do that now. If I have to, and my friend who's gone on talks with me, etc., he knows to get me to the venue early
Okay.
because then I will walk around on the stage. I'll walk to the where the seating is and so on, and I will get used to what the temperature is. Um, what the colors are, etc. And I feel okay. I can't just walk in on something and work with that because it stresses me out badly.
Okay.
Um, but um, I was going to address there was something Eugene asked.
I got her list right here. I mean, I
Yeah,
haven't even brought this stuff up. I was going to ask it near the end
yeah,
when we
because
were done.
there was something she said that was actually related to something I said before, and I kind of wanted to address it, and I can't remember what it was.
Eugene said, maybe define autism for us, and how do you distinguish actual autism from
That's it.
personality type?
Yeah, that was it. Is yeah, there there is a there is a correlation, but I don't think causation for personality type and autism. The reason there are so many INTPs is just because you're born autistic, personality type is developed. I mean, sometimes it happens very young, and we've all seen that argument on how it happens, where it happens, and so on. And I have my own theories just based on observation, but certainly your brain is set as an autistic person from the time you're born, for sure. So I think because once again, all thoughts are so internalized, and like I said, if you're on the deep end of the spectrum and you're nonverbal, that you're entirely living inside your head, that naturally lends itself to primary TI. So we're starting right there. So why don't we develop very many autistic ISTPs? Um, I think there's a reason because that involves SE parent,
ISC. Yeah.
yeah, and being aware of your environment and how things work, etc., and being attracted to that. And we aren't, as I just said earlier, it's like something can be very obvious to everyone else, and I will completely miss it. Um, so that's why ISTPs aren't in the top four, even though they're TI users too.
Yeah. I've definitely met an ESFJ who I thought was definitely autistic.
Mhm.
ESFJ in that sense, and that would be the same quadra as us. And so I don't see why that wouldn't be plausible.
Well,
The same for ISFJs for that matter. Yeah, you're right, because I think it really comes down to the SE. And the reason why I think INTJs can pull it off, if we're going to correlate the two, um, it would be SE inferior, which some argue is not even as functioning as SE nemesis, in that sense, because of the way it functions itself. Um, let's go over. You have this meme I stole. Said limited or odd use of language for communication.
Mhm.
And so could this really show itself with like, I've seen some young kids and like, just like blurt out, blah, 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 and they're like trying to talk and that's what they're saying. And then you got to
Mhm.
like stop them and say, okay, calm down. And then they're able to speak more proficiently. Is that what
Yeah.
that pretty much
It,
is?
it it can mean anything that kind of like falls under that umbrella. Um, f- for me, I mean, for instance, it also includes echolalia, and there's another form where you repeat what other people say. But I would tend to, as a child, and this is something that even now, if I let my guard down, I don't do as an adult because I just kind of outgrew it. But as a child, I would kind of talk in, and this is really common. As a matter of fact, I think that that meme that you took off of my wall mentions it about talking in, yeah, talking in learned phrases or so on.
Yeah, that's the next
I,
one.
I would talk in phrases that I learned on television, um, because because once again, I'm completely inside my head. If somebody said something to me, I would go through my files of what did so and so say on this TV show when someone said this to him, rather than being able to naturally come out with a response.
Yeah.
And so that would fall into what you were just talking about, because somebody would say something to me and I would come out with a response that wasn't really appropriate because to me it fit. This is what I learned that you're supposed to say when someone says this to you. Um, or to communicate with someone who I might not feel comfortable with, if I have to just walk up and meet and greet, I would start rattling off dialogue from a TV commercial. Um, so it can include things like that, but that's what I did a lot, was learn my communication skills from watching television.
Okay. I
Mhm.
can understand that. Not know how healthy that is, but
It's not
depending
at
on what
all,
you're
and
watching.
that's why I had to outgrow it. Wouldn't make
uh,
much sense right now.
the interest, when I first got this meme from you, and I was thinking like I can totally see why this connected with when you're talking MBTI types and things like that. Reduced or absent social interest in others, including children of your own age. With me, it was kind of like I had no problem going out and being in my own head somewhere and
Yeah.
being by myself. I would frequently go into the highest tree possible, climb to the top, and sit there for hours alone.
Mhm.
But that didn't make me antisocial because I was always really popular at school. I always had a lot of friends
Right.
and things like that. And so I loved people.
Mhm.
But with the high TI, it's just like I took in so much data that day that I needed to go process
Mhm.
and so that was, I think, some ENTPs that maybe don't learn the social skills like I was forced to, being raised a Jehovah's Witness, and you're thrust into church and you're there 5 days a week.
True.
Uh, you had to learn. And so I just know how to learn that thrown in the fire. And so I see a lot of ENTPs that, oh, he's just autistic, but no, not really. He just hasn't gotten over his SI inferior.
Right.
Uh,
And go ahead.
it's fine.
I'm super informative, so I. But yeah, that's addressing the Eugene question again, which is there's a difference between, and we talked about, this is why I never in discussions brought up the fact that I have autism, is because in some groups it's a touchy subject. But there is a difference between a personality type. Like I said, that's why I'm talking about there's more correlation than causation.
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
want to, I want to bring in both. That way people can see what I'm saying.
right.
And so I'm trying to bring out everything that relates to me as prime
Yeah.
example A, and but I obviously have no problem driving. Nothing really affects me on my day-to-day basis.
Right.
These are just more like nuisances, and I see that so it's like when you're talking about autism, it's just a next extra step where it affects you where you just can't function.
Right.
And so when you mentioned like lights, are we referring to like do police cars driving by with lights flashing and then the sirens? Is that like gonna
For children, it's terrifying. For me, I realize that there are police cars and lights and sirens. So as an adult, that doesn't so much bother me. I really hate it when an ambulance goes by and has its siren on when I'm like on the sidewalk, because that's kind of unbearable. But once again, I'm old enough where it's like I'm not going to fall into the sidewalk and start screaming. That's where I said about TV representations are kind of unrealistic because you see stuff like that a lot. And the problem is most of us will outgrow that. We don't have childish little meltdowns and so on, after you're 25 years old. Some do, but usually no. But yeah, that's the difference between personality type and having an autism diagnosis. Is a neurotypical INTP merely knows who they are and the environment that they should be in and what's appropriate for them. Whereas an autistic person, INTP or not, nothing works. You can't say, oh, well, I just prefer a job where I'm quietly working by myself, etc., and that makes me happy. I can do that, but something is still stopping me or distracting me because I have those sensory issues, or there are so many obsessive things going over in my head from what I did before I left for work this morning that working alone isn't going to do me any good. So that's the difference, is that if you just have a personality type, you know what your preferences are and what environment is good for you.
Yeah.
If you're on the spectrum, there is no environment that's good for you, and it's a constant challenge, and there are deficits and things that prevent you from getting your tasks done. I still don't. I say this frequently. I don't do well by myself.
Yeah.
I've lived by myself like roughly half my life, but whenever I live by myself, I end up doing things like overflowing the bathtub or almost starting a fire and all that kind of stuff. Because once again, I'm inside my head. I lose all that SE stuff, and I don't pay attention to what I'm doing.
I have the problem of like leaving the stove on because I'm multitasking sometimes. And granted, it's never been catastrophic, so I guess that's where the turn off is. But it's just like I'm like always like, oh shit, I just run back because even the ENTJ makes fun of me for this kind of stuff because he's obviously has SE ability and I don't, and where he could say something to me and I process and I just shut down, and I'm just like,
Right.
he's like, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, and it's like I have those abilities to shut down and things like that, but you can get me out of it, and it's not like catastrophic.
Uh-huh.
It's just that I just get, you start processing things like that, and so that's interesting. Um, let's go over a couple more questions they have. I don't know how much longer you want to keep talking. Good.
I'm fine now. I still don't feel good. I'm still tired, but I'm kind of in the zone, so we're cool.
Okay, because it's 2 a.m. for me, and I'm usually go to bed 5 more hours, so I can be up all night. But
Yeah.
uh, what is it about the eye contact that is an issue?
Um, and I think this is where, if we want to get into your topic and relate it, where we're maybe getting out of SE and more into FE, is eye contact is extremely intimate. And a lot of us have problems with looking at someone in the eye because, and this probably isn't an exaggeration, but unless I know you really well, if I look you in the eye, it's kind of like we're touching our private parts.
Yeah, I get
It's kind
that.
of uncomfortable.
If anybody's ever dated an INJ, they always have that NI hero stare. They're like going through your soul.
Uh-huh.
That's kind of interesting. It's kind of intimidating at first, but then I just kind of get used to it, I guess.
Yeah. And that's what the problem with eye contact is and actually, just like with the sensory issues where I say, you know, slight sounds might bother me, but loud sounds don't. One of my students is like that. It's like, he has trouble working unless there's a lot of sound around him. Silence is distracting. Um, but yeah, the eye contact, it can be the opposite. I mean, a lot of people on the spectrum will have this creepy looking at you in the eye entirely while they're talking to you, because they feel like that's how they're, because it's a communication problem, that's how I'm better communicating with you, and they just get this eye lock. But in most cases, it's difficulty with looking people in the eye, because like I said, it feels extremely intimate and uncomfortable, and I feel like I'm standing in front of somebody naked if we have eye contact.
Yeah. And back on the routine, this is also in the meme, it just triggered my mind. I was thinking of other possibilities of what could happen. So if you have an autistic child who's used to getting picked up from school at 3:30
Hmm.
and the parent is not there, and can this cause like extreme, like, and other people would say, oh, this kid's just a spoiled brat, look how decadent he is, and in honesty he's just having a meltdown because the, the system is failed
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah, and the whole thing is it might it there's such a level of misunderstanding, and this is where the whole puzzle piece symbolism comes from. What bothers an autistic child, or for that matter an adult too, in one situation might not in another. Because it's like I said, like the inconsistency with sensory issues. So maybe the child's upset because this is a routine, and my mom's supposed to pick me up at 3:30 and she's not. It's 3:31 and I'm panicking. But it might just be he's logical enough to realize, once again, internal TI here. Um, she's not always going to be here. It might be 3:31, 3:32, or whatever. But what's upsetting me is the fact that at this time, after this point, um, most of the children are gone, or buses have left, or whatever, and I feel abandoned, and this is weird. Because that's
Yeah.
my case. I won't go into a store if it's closing soon, because that'll stress me and panic me to no end. So I won't even
You're
go if there's
calling
like
me out
15
again,
minutes.
man. You're making me like double guess myself. And I always blame that on the fact that I've worked retail before and I know the social construct of the people who work there. And the last thing I want to do is make their jobs worse. And that's just kind of effy child in my sense. And in restaurants, for instance, I feel really, really uncomfortable going to a restaurant that's about to close. And so I always go in and check in and look around and observe, talk to people. And is it okay to eat? They're like, oh yeah, we're fine, And
Right.
so that's funny that you mentioned that.
But that's always important for people too. They have to realize, because there's this incorrect concept that, which those of us in the self-advocacy community have, of everybody's a little bit autistic. No, that there's a thing called human nature, and I've talked about this as far as cognitive functions go too, because I kind of have my own theory, which kind of works out pretty well. But it's just a matter of, we're people. So
Yeah,
I do things the same as other people do them, but there's just something else attached to it. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that I'll say that people who are neurotypical can relate to. But the point is it's kind of like, here's normal. Then there's this Grand Canyon, and then the autistic people are over here with it.
yeah,
So you can go into a store or a restaurant if it's about to close, if you're with a friend or whatever, and says, it's fine. It's like, they're used to people
yeah,
eating later, whatever. We'll go and eat. I can't. I will say, no, please don't make me do this. And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll be on the and I'll start the stuttering and all that, and I won't do it. So that's kind of the difference.
Okay. No, no, I wasn't trying to make light. I apologize if I did.
No, I know. I'm just saying a
Uh,
lot of people don't know the difference between, yeah, this
yeah.
is normal behavior and this is not normal behavior.
Don't get me wrong. I compromise for Fe Demon all the time. So it's like, so I'm just like, okay, and so I don't know how to say his name. It's like Matus Stepniak. his first question is autism related to low sensing functions, and you can answer that, and then
Yeah, because like I said, this is more your area of expertise.
yeah.
I'm an autism expert, but like I said, I'm not really a cognitive function expert. But I think we kind of like talked about it a bit.
Yeah. You
Because
can
like I said,
see the correlation, but not necessarily causation again. So it's just like, and so you can see why someone would mistake that.
yeah. Yeah, like I said,
But
I miss things in my environment. Like I said, when I was saying about that, it's like other people pick up how to naturally do things almost by the proverbial osmosis, because you walk into a building and it's like everyone else will know how to get to the office they're looking for. If you've never been in an office building before, or when you get out, how to get out. And I will get lost because I won't notice that there's very clear directions for, hey, this is how you get to the HR office,
okay,
and,
interesting.
and I'm just
Yeah, I
lost.
definitely don't have that problem whatsoever, and I have SE demon, and
Yeah,
so navigating myself through anything is pretty simple to me, and it's just like because I just you know anticipate what I think people would do, how they would design this store.
right,
And so I'm just like, okay, if I was here, I put the bathroom there. And most of the time I'm right.
right.
And
That's what I'm talking about. And again, I don't relate to that because
okay.
my own internal processes don't have logic that goes in that direction. Um, because which was a huge problem when I was a child, and it is for other people on the spectrum when they're a child, which is, you know, what makes sense to me is once again my own internal logic, and it doesn't make sense to anybody else. So if I go into an office building looking for the restroom, I'm going to think it's in a place that makes no sense to anybody else.
Yeah, it's behind the water fountain. No, I don't know. And so his second question is, if there is frequent connection between typology and autism, are there any SE/SI DOMs with autism spectrum that Stephen have met? I think he's referring to like, I doubt SE DOMs,
Right,
ESTPs, ESFPs,
right, and
but
and and and
ISFJ,
again,
I can see ISFJ.
mhm. That's getting into the causation versus correlation thing again. Is I don't think um, it would be possible to develop high SE if you're on the spectrum. But people who have autism can be, and very often are, primary extroverts. You see a lot of, especially any,
I've met
um,
Asperger ENTPs. Believe me, I know they exist, and they're very social.
right, and yeah, and that's the whole thing. I,
And that's
I,
a
I
problem.
have, if one of my friends, if one of my friends is watching this, he'll know what I'm talking about. But
Yeah.
I also have my own theory on autism that I have, sort of like typology. I have a 6-type theory that there's 6 types of autism,
Okay.
and I'm a type E. We tend to be emotionally volatile. Type Fs are purely thought oriented, and they're the ones who, you can't sit in my chair and I have this long list of rules when you walk into my house, kind of like a Dr. Sheldon Cooper.
Cooper is what I was
Um,
supposed to say, yeah.
but I'm a mess. I mean, I don't set up things. I do internally for myself, but for me, if somebody's over at my house, it's just chaos. So that's all I know. But anyway, there are extroverted, because I call them type Ds, extroverted people on the spectrum, and those are the people who often get accused of being rude or not knowing boundaries and so on. Is they will, I mean, we're famous for not like being hugged, but an extroverted person with autism will come right up to you and hug you automatically, because once again, they don't understand boundaries. Internally, it's still the same, those same 3 things. So internally, it makes sense to me that it's okay to do that. But once
Yeah.
again, logic. But the other person isn't going to like it. If you're meeting your boss for the first time, you're not going to walk up to him and hug him. But for somebody on the
No.
spectrum, it's like,
Yeah.
if that makes sense to me, just like with me with the bathroom being in a weird place, it's okay to hug him.
Yeah. Because there was the Asperger ENTP I'm referring to. I don't think he's a Jehovah's Witness anymore. I haven't spoke to him in a couple of years, but he would show up to the Kingdom Hall, if you might imagine, in like full leather and a motorcycle helmet on, and just like walk in the door and start talking to people. I'm like, dude, you got to take your helmet off. And it's like, oh, okay, you know, and like, and so things like that. And he would get jobs as a waiter, and I'm like, do you really think that's a good idea? I mean, he'd always end up getting fired, and because eventually he's going to say something that's going to get him fired.
Right.
And he was not an introvert by any means, you know, definitely an ENTP by my typing. And he didn't bother me, and he didn't bother my brother, but most people did not like him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, when I first met him, he made me nervous. Like, is this guy going to drag out some woman and chop her off in the forest? That's the first intentions I got when I first met him, because he was so off-putting.
Right.
But getting to know him, he's a very sweetheart, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And I jumped at that conclusion, and I feel bad about that. But that was the first initial, you know, impression I got when I first met him. And so that makes sense when we're talking about sensing. But
Mm-hmm.
a lot of stuff, I think, I mean, the world is ran by SJs and SPs, and so you're always going to have that you're not normal. Let's categorize you and do special classes for you and things like that anyways. And so that's kind of be the correlation. But and to answer his question, not DOMs, but I definitely knew an ESFJ autistic person. And
Yeah.
because being autistic has nothing to do with abstract, correct?
Right.
So you can be a completely concrete person who's fully autistic, you know,
And,
and
and that's why, yeah, that's why, like I said, in the top 4, there's also ISTJ. They're very concrete, correct?
yeah,
So yeah, because we're concerned about things, and I think this is for myself. Even though, like I said, I'm not an expert in the cognitive functions, but that's kind of where SI comes. My SI child is people on the spectrum are usually very attached to objects. Things are very important. I I said one time, actually it was somebody else interviewing me. I said, if I break a coffee cup, I feel bad for the cup. Um, I do have,
okay,
we have this famous empathy for inanimate objects. And it wasn't just because, oh, I broke a perfectly good coffee cup. I feel bad because I killed it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that's where that kind of like links in. So
That's
yeah, we are very object oriented, and there are quite a few definite high SI users who, you know, are concerned about how things are.
interesting. Okay,
Yeah, very
and
concerned.
so Hui Chong asks, what are the learned coping mechanisms for autistic children and adults?
Well, we talked about stimming, and like I said, and I need to, which is also common with others, like I said, to get used to something or familiarize myself with something before I use it. Um, like starting new jobs, like I had to for me in last month, um, is horrible. I still don't feel, you know how people get into a job and it's eventually, you know, it's like it's unfamiliar, but within a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or whatever, it's like your second home. You know, it's like this is where I go, and it's like I know my stuff and I'm comfortable here. I'm still not at that point in the job I have now because I'm only there 2 days a week for 4 hours a week, 4 hours a day. And so every time I go, it's like my first day, and I don't have that settled in feeling. Um, so we need to familiarize ourselves with things as thoroughly as possible. And then, like I said, physically, physical release of energy or tension, like I said, which is stimming, pacing. Sometimes it's not something repetitive. Sometimes it's causing a sensation for yourself. Like I used to squeeze my ear. That'll do it too. You know, just so it's to the point that it's just slightly painful, and that's a stim too. Um, uh, what else is comforting? Actually, just the whole thing on being informative, because if I feel, and no, actually with me it's the opposite, but with a lot of autistic people, it's if they're upset or nervous, they will talk a lot, which is, like I said, my mother being on the spectrum, she was like that. If she was nervous or worried about something, it would be continuous information. With me, it's the opposite, I think, actually. If because it's like I told my sister, it's like I very rarely call her lately, and I've had a really bad year. Anybody who follows me on Facebook knows that, and I've not been talking to people. If I'm happy, I will call you up and talk your ear off for an hour and not let you get a word in edgewise. Um, but um, but what I will do as far as communication goes is I will, because I am a published writer, I will write instead. And I get a lot done if I'm feeling horrible. I can't write at all if I'm in a good mood. The
Okay.
last thing in the world I want to do.
So writer's block. Although some musicians say that when life is good, they have nothing to write about. And I don't really have anything really to write about anymore. And I used to be a songwriter. But I look back at my music when I was young, 20-year-old, I thought I was quite whiny. But question 4 is implementing applied from, okay. How are these coping mechanisms implemented, applied from a cognitive functions point of view? If I might interact with that one, I would say it would depend on if the autistic person's systematic or not. Granted, if we're talking ISTJs, IMPs, they're always going to be systematic, but we could imagine the possibility of INFJ, for instance, is one that seems to pop out. I don't know. Learn coping skills. It would have to be coping skills of finding a good pattern that's real predictable, something you actually can rely on, do on a day-to-day basis. Because I'm thinking about the scheduling thing like that. Can you fly?
Yeah, I don't like.
Because the airport must be a nightmare.
Yeah. That's what I was getting to is I don't like the whole having to be at a certain place at a certain time. I will sit because I stress about it so much. I will sit at the gate like for an hour before my plane takes off because once again it's a new and unfamiliar place. If I arrive at the last minute, I'm screwed for the whole rest of the trip. But there was something I was going to say, and I can't remember what it was. I don't know if it's going to come back to me, but something in the midst of what you were trying to explain. But yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah. Question 5, how do they effectively work from a cognitive functions point of view? And the thing is, they don't. And so we're not going to be able to correlate the two. And so what we take away from this whole interview, and we're talking MBTI, is there are a lot of cognitive functions from certain types, NTPs, STJs, for instance, possibly INTJ, because the SI inferior can really screw with them. But SE inferior, sorry. There are cognitive functions that look like autistic functions. However, what people are leaving out of the equation, and you made a very profound statement, is autistic people are people too. And so they resemble humans. And so just because someone's autistic doesn't mean they're only going to display those autistic things 100% of the time.
There's something actually that's funny that I also always talk about when I do speaking engagements, which is not everything that we do is because we're autistic. We do it because we're people. It's not related to those three things that make you the core of that makes up the core of autism. And in the same way, like I said, because we're people, there are, as I said earlier, things that neurotypical people who aren't on the spectrum do, which sometimes looks like autism.
Yeah.
And and you and actually Chase, spoke on that. It's like sometimes, um, and it does happen that children, and this is why I'm not in favor of children getting diagnosed very, very young, because you get stuck with that label and it's very hard to remove it. And if, for instance, you are like a high TI or NE user, I mean, you're stuck with that for the rest of your life.
What age do you think would be good?
Yeah, I don't think that. I mean, early intervention is important, but I mean, I don't think you can be 100% sure until your child is old enough, maybe starting kindergarten, to observe how they're interacting with other children. Because a lot of times, a lot of children will, just because of their nature, once again, perfectly neurotypical TI users like investigating their toys. They want to know how it works, what are the insides. And that's a good thing if your child's a future scientist, but it doesn't mean that they're a future autistic person.
Correct.
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember just breaking apart computers just to see what they look like on the inside for quite a lot of different things. And I shouldn't say breaking, I actually took it apart. Nice. But yeah, that's interesting to me. I don't know, I have a lot of stuff in my mind, just like Innie's going crazy about but I don't want to take up too much time, but like how do you think autistic people got along in the past, or did they?
Um, it depends on the culture. We can't really say. I mean, I don't like, for instance, diagnosing historical figures. Almost certainly because the level, once again, those three things are so high with Albert Einstein that if he wasn't on the spectrum, I would be shocked. But in general, we can't really do it. I mean, a lot of people say like Thomas Jefferson, but we can't really tell.
Yeah.
But in certain cultures, people who would just be, who would get a autism diagnosis here in like more primitive cultures, hunter-gatherers like Native Americans and so on, those were very often the shamans.
Interesting.
They would go, because they couldn't socialize with people, they'd go off into the woods, commune with nature, etc.
This probably includes Scandinavians too.
Right, and then come back and bring that knowledge and be separate from the group, but still be able to function. And they were an important part of the group, whereas now we're just kind of like suspicious, we're suspect and harassed. But yeah, in a lot of other cultures, you're just seen as somebody who's apart and special, and you might get treated better than everyone else.
Yeah, I understand that, because whenever I watch a lot of Viking shows and things like that, and to me, whenever they go and talk to the shaman or the oracle or whatever like that, and that's an MP in my opinion. That's what I would see myself being that way. Although I wouldn't want to be all by myself though, and so that would be an issue. But yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if we really want to take down cultures such as the Spartans, for instance, where you had a real brutal rites of passage, more than likely they all died.
Mm-hmm.
Where you would have to go out and have wolves attack you, and you got to kill them and all this other stuff. And so, if we're going to be just brutally honest,
Yeah.
so that was kind of how a lot of the more SP centered cultures, I guess, would have culled them from the earth, and which is unfortunate, but that's just, I don't know, I just think about different things like that, and that's anyways. So is there anything else you wanted to bring out?
I think we covered it all, and in my and this always Robert always talks about how damned informative I am when he actually you may know this, I'm in the process of writing my first novel, and he was one of my beta readers. And
Yeah.
my writing style is so informative. I have like these 100-word sentences with 5 subclauses in it and so on. And he's just so direct. He's like, I didn't understand any of this. I don't know. Why don't you just come out and say what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
But at one point or another, I'm going to say everything that I want to say, and I get around to it, and I even suffer from, but I'll suffer from that thing where it's like after I'm done, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I should have talked about this and this and this and this, but it's useless. But I think we covered all the important stuff.
All right, awesome.
Mhm.
All right, well, thanks for coming on the show and show on my channel. And
I told you should have one.
what's up?
I told you should have one.
Well, I mean, I've always been told I had a radio voice for some reason. I think my voice is like weird, but whatever. And no, I enjoy these. I like talking to people, and so if anybody's watching this and they ever want to contact me and want to be on the show, give me uh you know a message or something. At least have something interesting to talk about because I like all things interesting. And so I know this was something that keeps coming up over and over again. And maybe after people watch this, more questions will come up. Maybe we'll have a part two,
Right.
you know? And so thank you for coming on and peace out to everybody.